Let us enter into this time of worship and celebration. In the safety of this sacred place, we are invited into a time of gratitude, reflection, renewal, and hope. Come in, bringing all of who you are. Calm your hurried pace. Know that you are not alone. There is strength and caring support for you here. Let us quietly reflect on these words. A few moments ago, Marian read to us Jesus' parable of the corrupt judge. It appears in the 18th chapter of Luke's Gospel. When Marian said her readings this morning were a bit different, she was absolutely right. And yet, I find this parable of Jesus of the corrupt judge one of his most interesting, one of his most challenging too. And I think it's important that we take a close look at it, because this parable, the details of it are worth paying attention to. First of all, just a bit of background. A widow's place in Judean and Galilean society was always precarious. If you go through the Old Testament and the New Testament, you will see time and time again that the Scriptures demand, continually plead for a direct and immediate, generous, and a positive response to the plight of a widow and her children. You see, under ancient Israelite and Jewish law, if a husband died, the wife could not inherit any property or any money at all. She had a legal right to be supported by the husband's estate, the dead husband's estate, as specified in the marriage contract. Now, under normal circumstances, the husband's estate did take care of a widow's needs. But normal conditions were not at all, by no means universal. All too often, many widows and their children were left destitute. In fact, this was a common state of affairs when Jesus went about his public ministry. By the time Jesus arrived on the scene, any woman, married, single, widowed, if they were destitute, were simply called a widow. And again, we have to remember that again and again, the Scriptures in both the Old Testament and the New Testament call for special protection of these people. And second, this parable of Jesus demonstrates his use of some very colorful language. Actually, it demonstrates it to the nth degree. In this parable, Jesus makes it clear that judges are not among his favorite people, that he would disagree very much with what Ecclesiasticus said that Marian read to us about God being a judge. This judge, in this parable, is not only unjust, he's thoroughly corrupt. We know that because the best New Testament scholars, people like Robert Funk and Brandon Scott, whose specialty is the study of the parables, make it clear that the reason the judge is not rendering a verdict in the widow's case is because that judge is holding out for a handout, money. He's looking for a bribe to decide the case in favor of one party or the other. Also, the terms Jesus uses to refer to the judge, and we have since used terms like the unjust judge or the unrighteous judge or the corrupt judge, are way, way too polite. To get a better sense of what Jesus was actually saying and how his first century listeners would have understood his meaning, it would be better to take off our kid gloves and to call a spade, because Jesus refers to him, if we get right down to brass tacks, as a scumbag judge. He goes on to describe that judge as practically being a psychopath. You'll remember Marion reading this morning this fellow's own self-description. I'm not afraid of God, and I don't care about anybody. Again, this English translation's way too polite. A better understanding of what the judge said goes something like this. I couldn't care less. I don't give a hoot about God or anyone else. Bottom line is this judge, this guy was one nasty piece of work who totally deserves to be a scumbag. That title. But that's not all. Jesus also uses some very interesting and humorous language when he describes the poor little widow who keeps coming and pestering the judge. He describes her, yes, as fragile, as vulnerable, as being in a precarious position, but she keeps coming back to the courtroom and whacking the judge in the face until he gets a black eye. That's a real translation. A metaphorical black eye, by the way, not a real one, but a metaphorical black eye. She does that because she knows a judge won't decide the case until she or someone, the other party gives him the money, that judge the money he's looking for, his bribe. The Australian theologian Bruce Brewer translates what Jesus had to say about the judge and the pestering widow this way. Hear what the scumbag judge says, though I don't give a hoot about God or any human being, because this widow keeps on getting in my face and giving me a black eye, I'll rule in her favor. Otherwise, her continual nagging is going to give me ulcers. And again, this is colorful language. And we must remember that all Jesus' teaching and all Jesus' preaching uses colorful language because colorful language was the language of the common people. And you see, Jesus portrays that judge in these colorful and negative terms because he wants to make it clear to his listeners, then and now, that the judge in this parable does not represent God. In fact, the judge in this parable is a contrast to God. Jesus is drawing a sharp distinction between the nature and the character of God and the nature and the character of this judge. And we have to get that. It's important for us to understand what Jesus is doing. We have to get it straight. Because if we don't, right off the bat, we're going to be led down the proverbial garden path in understanding what this parable is about. And as many of you may have known in the past, and sometimes right up to this day, we've been led astray by assuming that this parable is all about prayer. People quite wrongly assume that in this parable of Jesus, the corrupt judge is a stand-in for God, and that the troublesome widow represents all the rest of us. Preachers and Sunday school teachers have told us almost since time immemorial that we're supposed to follow the widow's example, that we're just supposed to keep on praying, to keep on nagging God until God finally caves, until God gives in and answers our prayers. Or to put this in a slightly different way, to put a slightly different spin on this misinterpretation, we're told that like the scumbag judge, God will eventually get sick and tired, sick to death of hearing our voice, of hearing our most fervent prayers, and just answer them because he just wants us to shut up and sit down and leave him alone. And that interpretation of this parable is dead wrong. If we want to get it right, we have to take that parable and turn it upside down and stand it on its head. First of all, Jesus would never, ever have used that kind of language. The language he uses to describe the judge, to describe God. Never. Second, to just about everyone's shock, people of Jesus' day and our own day, the bothersome widow, the troublesome widow, not the judge, represents God. The judge represents the religious institutions and the religious authorities of Jesus' day, and yes, ordinary people of faith, and that would include you and me too. You see, God is like the persistent widow. God is like the pleading widow. God is always showing up, constantly knocking on our doors. Knocking on the doors of our churches and our synagogues and our mosques. Knocking on the doors of our temples. Knocking on the doors of all the places of worship. God is all like that widow. God is always showing up, persistently, knocking on the doors of our hearts and souls to attend to the pain, the suffering, the injustice, and the sorrow of the widows of our own time. To attend to the suffering and the pain and the injustice of our neighbor. To attend to the wounds of creation, which in fact are wounds to God's very own being. When we realize that the judge represents us, we feel a sting. And we should, because every parable of Jesus has a fang. And the fang in this parable is that the unjust judge, the corrupt judge, the scumbag judge, not only represents Palestine's first century institutional religious authorities and political authorities, but all the rest of us too. It has a bite, as parables are supposed to. Remember how Jesus described the judge as a man who didn't give a hoot about God or other people? Well, is there anyone here this morning, anyone here who can honestly say they've never ever fit this description? I can't. Can any of us claim we've never been indifferent, never been irritable, never been closed off? Can any of us claim that we've never ever been fearful, unsympathetic? Can any of us gathered here can say that every day, 24/7 of every week, we've always been loving, kind, compassionate, no matter what? Can every congregation, can every Christian denomination claim that first and foremost, without any exceptions whatsoever, that every decision they make, that every church policy that is hammered out is based on loving God and loving neighbor? Are we always open to healing the pain and the brokenness and the hurt of other people? Or do we make assumptions? Do we make our decisions based on maybe irrational fears? Do we go out of our way to protect ourselves as compulsively we erect our invisible barriers and boundaries? Yes, invisible, but very real too. How many times have we thought to ourselves or said out loud when we see the unemployed, well, if those lazy layabouts would just get a job? How often do we assume that homeless people are on drugs? People we should fear. How often do we assume that when people have issues, that it's not my problem Turn it over to the police or the welfare agencies or the health department or the politicians or maybe somebody else who has time and money and authority to take care of it, but leave me out of it. The truth is, and I'm not going to answer for you, but I'll answer for myself. The truth is that the unjust judge lives in me. Lives in me. The unjust judge lives in our institutions, and I dare say most of the rest of us too. On the other hand, the scriptures attest to the fact that God hears the cries of the hopeless and the helpless. God dwells in the unseen, the unheard, the unloved, and unwanted people of our world. God is the wronged widow crying for justice. God is the widow pleading with you and me to listen, to care. God is a widow calling us to keep our hearts open. And God is a widow whose bothersome, indeed troublesome persistence is never in vain because it is rooted and grounded in love. And then at the end of this parable, Jesus asks a peculiar question. When the son of Adam, who is a mythical character in this Bible, when the son of Adam comes, will he find faith on the earth? Will he find faith? Will he find faith that willingly, generously, and joyfully responds to God the widow? Will the son of Adam find faith that struggles and contends and wrestles with new truth revealed perhaps in this and other parables of Jesus? Will the son of Adam find faith and goodwill persisting in compassion and justice seeking, no matter how hard it may be or how much it may seem in vain? And now we come to the question perhaps that matters most. Will he find that trust? Will the son of Adam find that faith in you and me and all who have gathered to worship this morning? This is Reverend Dell Stewart. I hope you enjoyed this audio presentation of today's time of worship and celebration. If you did, please click the like button. You can also click on subscribe to make it easier to find our channel, and click the bell to receive a notification each time a podcast becomes available. Peace and joy now from Westminster United Church in Windsor, Ontario.